Hello and welcome to Talking Points. I'm Dave Kelly, Director of Advanced Media Production at Cal State Long Beach. Today we're going to pull back the curtain on television news and take a look at what goes on behind the scenes when the cameras are not rolling. My guest today is Elizabeth Sanchez. Ms. Sanchez is a broadcast news journalist and she is also an instructor in the Department of Journalism. Welcome, Elizabeth, and thank you for joining us on Talking Points.
Thanks for having me.
Well, before we get started on our main topic, I want to mention that you did put together a book called Water Cooler, so I'll show that to our audience. The subtitle is Behind the Scenes and Off the Record, The Untold Stories from Broadcasters. Now, this book is a collection of essays from various broadcasters that you've encountered over the years. You've written several essays in the book as well. These essays, I had a chance to read them. They are a combination of poignant stories, tragic stories, some humor, and some inspiring stories as well. And what I liked about it most is that it shows that these reporters have a very human side as well. When we see them on television, they seem to be very stoic, very much in control, but they also have that human side as well, and they're affected by the news events that they cover, even if you don't see it on the news. What motivated you to put this book together?
Well, there's always that time when you shoot a story, you cover a story, and then you go back to the newsroom, and then you're around the water cooler. That's why it's called water cooler. Or you're at the coffee machine, and you're saying, okay, so what really happened at the story? What was that person really like when you interviewed her? And so that's why I decided, there isn't anything like this. I'd love to tell more stories about what is going on after the coverage of the story takes place.
When you asked these reporters to put these essays together, what was their reaction and how was it difficult for them to put these stories together?
I did run into a lot of reluctancy because they didn't know how their employers would react for them putting out a story. But and then of course, journalists, we're all skeptical. So I ran into someone saying, well, why? Why do you want, and I just thought, it's really interesting. It's not that I had anything really to gain. I mean, I self-published the book. And I ran into a lot of that. But so a lot of these people that have written an essay are my friends, my personal friends who decided, what, I think you have a good idea. Let's put something together.
Well, I think some of that reluctance that you're referring to is the fact that reporters are trained to not inject themselves into the story. And that's what you're asking them to do, is to take a look at the story and see how it affected you. And maybe that's where that reluctance came from.
That's true. You don't want to, reveal too much of your human side of you, I guess, if you will, because of, there's a lot of labels being thrown around, such as, that's a biased reporter, or, they're delivering fake news, and you never want that to affect your credibility as a journalist.
Okay, well, on that note, let's move on to our main topic, which is pulling back the curtain on television news. So for those in the audience that have never been to a television studio, never been behind the scenes in TV news, tell us what it's like. What does the newsroom look like at a typical local news organization? Who's working in the newsroom, and what time do they start work if they're preparing the 6 p.m. newscast?
Okay, if they're preparing the 6 p.m. newscast, that's a more decent time. You're in there about 8 o'clock, and you're surrounding, 8 in the morning. You're at a table, or there's a whiteboard, you're writing down story ideas, because everybody has a diverse background. Everybody reads different things, they have different interests, so we all come together with different story ideas. And then you come to the table with stories, ideas, something that maybe you heard about, maybe you got an email, maybe you heard about it when you were driving in. So then you decide, okay, what's newsworthy? Because it's all about the audience. I mean, in the end, it's all about the audience. What do they care about? What do they want to know more about? And so a reporter may be assigned one of these stories, and then sometimes you go out, you make some phone calls, you go do some interviews, and then you find out that it's not quite what that person who emailed me told me it was going to be like. So, we have a saying in the news business, a good story ruined by the facts. And then it's not a story, and you have to drop it, and you have to move on to something else. So sometimes you may be working on 2 or 3 different stories before your actual story appears on the air.
And you don't want to be accused of that old cliche of never letting the truth get in the way of a good story. Which
right,
is
never.
Sort of the twist on the phrase that you used. So if it takes from 8 a.m. until 6 p.m. to put together a newscast, the individual reporters, the correspondents, are doing their particular stories, which are maybe a minute and a half, 2 minutes long. Why does it take so long, all day long, from 8 a.m. to 6 to do a 2-minute story? What are some of the barriers or obstacles that you have to overcome during the day to get that story down to where it should be?
Well, there's a lot of research involved, and because news is very reactionary, you have to try to find out if those people are available to speak with you. And in the broadcast business, you want to get that person on camera, and you have to physically drive to them to get them on camera. Technology is fabulous, but the best way to get an interview is in person. And so you want to have to drive around, and sometimes in Los Angeles, things can take a long time to get to because of our traffic situation. But you don't want to just interview one person, you want to interview several people because you really want to know more about the story. What I love about this business is that you get a little bit of information about something and then you start learning a lot about it. And in order to do that, you have to talk to different people and do a little bit of research yourself. So that's why it takes all day. You know, when you're doing the morning news early in the morning at 5 a.m., a lot of people are unavailable to speak with you. And a lot of times you're looking at interviews from the night before and just kind of retelling a story maybe in a different way or a reaction to it because it happened the day before.
Now, what about the late-breaking stories where you don't have the luxury of a long day to put together a story and do all the careful fact-checking? How do you manage your time when you're putting together that late-breaking story?
That's a good question. When there's a breaking news story, you're going to the situation, you know, physically driving there. You're, let's say it's a fire. You're trying to get a hold of the fire captain or the fire department, and maybe there's a public information officer that is able to give you information, and then you see the firefighters there, and you're using a lot of your observation skills as well. And you know, if you see a fire and there's black smoke, you know that it's still going. And if you see white smoke, you know that, you know, maybe they've got a good handle on this fire and it's almost out. So there's a lot to learn as a journalist, and when you go out to the scene, you're using your observation skills. Because also, if you see a fire and you see people out and they're in their pajamas or they're in no shoes on, you know that they ran out of their house probably with just the clothes on their back. And so a lot of being a reporter is using those observation skills and then also going to interview people to find out the facts of what's happening so that you can tell the viewer, the audience, what's happening. Maybe you run into traffic too and you're able to say, you know, avoid this area, there's traffic running from here to there. And then of course you have, at a news organization, you may have a helicopter up in the air and they're able to tell the reporter some information as well.
Beth, what you're talking about is having good instincts.
Good instincts. And then also you have a good team because it's a collaborative business. You have to be able to work with producers, you work with an assignment desk that hears the story, and you work with photographers, and you work with, you know, if there's a helicopter in the air, you work with them as well. So yes, good instincts and a lot of people helping you get the best story out there for your viewer.
Another way of talking about having good instincts is a phrase that's called having a nose for news and being able to find those stories and sift out those stories. Now, we've been talking about what we call spot news, which is where there's a fire and you can see physical evidence of that fire. But when we're talking about investigative journalism, then you really have to have that nose for news to be able to sift out fact from fiction or to go where things don't seem quite right. Tell us about investigative reporting for a moment. How does it work and how do you pursue it?
Yes. What I love about investigative reporting is I love uncovering wrongs. I love, you know, righting wrongs. And a lot of journalists are skeptical, and you don't just believe the first answer you get. You have to maybe look at multiple sources and vet out the information to see if it is accurate. There was a story I did that I actually won an Emmy for about the 911, reverse 911 system in San Diego and it not reaching everybody. Of course, the general consensus when the press release came out was, oh, you know, we reached this many people. People were notified by reverse 911 calls, but essentially we found out from our audience that that was not the case. So then we had to investigate, and then we had to you get, you know, public information, filing a FOIA, a Freedom of Information Act letter for the government agency to release that information to you. And then what we uncovered was we found out that indeed the reverse 911 system did not work for everybody. And so it was not something to be fully relied upon at that time. Of course, they improved it since then, and it was good. And that's what I love about this business. Maybe, you know, you're righting a wrong, and then there's improvement because of what you uncovered.
And one of the aspects of investigative news is that you don't always get the answers right away. You may have to sit on a story for a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months actually, but if you're confident that you're on the right trail, you'll stay with it. Let's talk about the newsroom situation where the 6 o'clock news is coming up. Stories are not coming together as well as they should. There's a lot of pressure. You have airtime, you have to fill that airtime. So that's when mistakes are made and people aren't doing the fact checking. Do you have to have a really strong ethical compass or professional standards in order to prevent some of those mistakes from happening?
Oh, absolutely. And then the producer is in charge of the newscast, so it's really on the producer to try and fill that time, to try to facilitate how they're going to fill that time. And maybe they have a reporter who has an interesting story, and maybe they say, you know what, we're going to ask you some questions about that story afterwards because we just lost, a minute and a half of news and we need to fill that time. And maybe this is of interest to our viewers. And then of course there's weather. Maybe weather's more interesting, so they can add time to weather. But it is hard when something falls through. We call it if missing a slot. If maybe a reporter misses a slot, and that's never a good thing in this business because that means an important story is not being told. But maybe the producer writes out something really quick, and maybe it's just anchor reading it face to face on the news instead of having the reporter. But yes, that is an issue whenever you lose time and you have to fill that time with something else.
We've been talking about local news, but you also had experience with national news, with the national network with CBS. What's the difference, or what was the difference in your experience between working for a local news operation and the national network news?
Well, you get a lot more help at the national level. You get more producers helping you, more writers helping you. Everything is looked at with a fine tooth and making sure that you have every dot dotted, every T crossed, and there's a lot more help. At the local level, it may just be you, especially if you're coming from college and you're getting your first job. It is you being the reporter, you being the writer, you being the producer, you being the photographer, you being the editor. Whereas when you're out with the network, you're being sent to a location and you have a team. So maybe the reporter comes there. For instance, if you're on a breaking news situation, it's a national news. I was often flown somewhere, and I can remember this plane going down, and I was going to the scene. Meanwhile, I had a producer making the phone calls, finding out what happened, and then them calling me and telling me, this is what we found out, this is what we learned, this is what you can go on the air reporting. They already had a photographer there already shooting stuff so that I can just go right there and get it on the news as fast as possible.
And in addition to network news, you also had the opportunity to host a program on PBS called A Place of Their Own, which was based on children's caregiving. And as host of that program, that was a different experience for you. Describe what that was like compared to working in either local news or network news as a correspondent.
I love that show. It's still on today, I believe, in some parts of the country, A Place of Our Own. It was an important show because it was about caregiving, and a lot of times it's not just the parent being the caregiver these days. Studies have shown that a lot of grandparents are helping to take care of the children. So it was aimed at all caregivers, and it was had information about experts. And as being a journalist really helped me with that show because it helped me to be able to interview these experts and learn more information, because as I said previously, being a reporter is about learning something new. You learn something new, you have to get the background, and then you deliver it to the viewers in a condensed form of what's the most important thing that they should know, that they would want to know, and leave no unanswered questions. So that was a great experience. I enjoyed doing the show. It was great having a lot of producers, because you would have with a show like that, you have segment producers, not just a news producer, to help you with getting information and getting guests on the show as well.
Well, on that note, we're going to have to go to the break. And when we come back with the break, we'll talk about how Elizabeth got started in the news business. Stay tuned.
How do you present a good image of a Hollywood star that just got arrested last night? That's the job of a public relations firm. Or as a media specialist, you may suggest new approaches for promoting an idea or product. This degree will prove an invaluable asset for anything it is that you do. You can become a part of this exciting field with a degree from Cal State Long Beach.
Welcome back to Talking Points. I'm Dave Kelly. My guest today is Elizabeth Sanchez. Elizabeth is a broadcast news journalist. And Elizabeth, before the break, I said that we'd start this second segment by talking about your personal journey through broadcast news. So let's start at the very beginning.
Very beginning.
When did you decide that you wanted to be in broadcast news, and how did that manifest itself?
I wanted to be a journalist since I was 11 years old. So my dad, he was an immigrant from Colombia. He worked at the Los Angeles Times, and we would always have newspapers all around. We'd have the Herald at the time, and the LA Times, and the San Gabriel Valley Tribune. And I just loved news, and I was curious about it. And then I watched news. We would watch television news in our household because my parents, their first language is Spanish, and they would just always watch the news in English. And so I enjoyed the television news, but I would go out with the recorder, a tape recorder at the time, and interview our neighborhood. I would interview our neighbors and ask them questions. And I can remember asking them, so why is your cat doing this? Or why is your dog acting this way? And I was curious. So I wanted to be a reporter from a very young age, and just tried to find out how I can make that possible, and even wrote a letter to Ann Martin from ABC at the time. She was at ABC 7 at the time, and then she went to KCBS, and actually asked her, how do you get in this business? And she said that you had to have a good sense of writing, and you had to have a thick skin, I remember her saying, and you have to have a passion for it, and then she said, and you have to look decent on camera.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good advice from Ann Martin. How did you actually break in, and what were the traits and the characteristics that you exhibited that allowed you to break into what is a very competitive marketplace?
Breaking in, I started an internship at KFI Radio in Los Angeles, and they had a news department, and they would do news at the top and the bottom of each hour. And so I just called up and said, do you have any internships available? And it was a new news director at the time, David G. Hall, and he said, come on over, and you can have an internship if you want it. And it was great because I ended up getting hired and helping a lot, and I did a lot of different shifts and went out on a lot of different stories. And then from there, actually got a job in Yuma, Arizona. That was my first television job. So there was a lot of news stories there to cover, which was great.
So when you went to Yuma, Arizona, you knew that this was a small market, and it took a little bit of time, I guess, to refine your skills there, but then you quickly moved on. I think it was fairly quickly that you moved on.
Right. I was there 11 months, and I remember I went to a lot of seminars before I got this job and asking news directors or other reporters their opinions, and I remember them saying, make your mistakes in Yuma. Start at a small station, and that's where you make your mistakes, because you don't want to make your mistakes in a big market. You'll get fired. So Los Angeles is market number 2. You don't really start there. You don't start there unless you're an assistant, but you don't start as a reporter there at all. You have to move to small markets and then move up to medium markets, and then you get to bigger markets. So I worked hard there. I was a reporter, then I was an anchor, and then because of my connection at KFI, they used to be owned by Cox Broadcasting. There was a opening in Charlotte, North Carolina, same company, Cox Broadcasting. I applied there and was surprised to get a job there in market number 25 at the time, which is similar to San Diego market.
Mm-hmm. And during this time of development, you were keeping your eyes open, and you found that opportunity in Charlotte, of course. But you have to have the willingness to move. I think that's really critical. A lot of folks that grow up in Southern California who want to get into television news, that's one of the real stumbling blocks for them. So what do you tell students about their willingness to move around?
Well, you have to be willing to do it if you really want to make it in this business. Southern California is a beautiful place to live. It's perfect weather, and the rest of the country, not so perfect weather, but you have to be willing to do it. And I don't regret moving around the country because I found that it made me grow, and I got to meet with people from different parts of the country, and Charlotte was the South, which was nice to get to know some of those people, and then being with CBS News, going all over across the country and getting to meet just different people, and I loved that, and loved seeing where the beautiful parts of our country. I mean, the beauty about Charlotte was they had 4 different seasons. I loved that. Really didn't experience that in Southern California, and so it was nice to see the spring, the fall, Winters were mild, so I could handle it, being a Southern California girl.
So having an open mind about weather
Having an
and
open mind.
location and geography is really helpful in this industry.
Oh, absolutely. I never thought I was going to stay there for 5 years, but I ended up staying in Charlotte for 5 years.
And as far as the business itself, there are always going to be good days and bad days. And during those bad days, what was it that kept you motivated to stay in this business and go back and try again the next day?
When you say bad days, are you talking about when things go wrong, or are you talking about covering bad stories? Because there's both kinds of bad days, and both happen in this business, because sometimes things will go wrong and you don't know where your story is going to lead you, and you have to have the tenacity to complete the story or bring it to a conclusion. And then also there are bad days when you're covering terrible stories where people did horrible things, and you're having to hear all the details, especially if you're covering a trial or that's taking place and you're hearing all of the details. And then we have to just say some of these details are not good for viewers to hear, and sometimes you have to put a cautionary line when it's airing on the air. But so yeah, there are different kinds of bad days, if you will. Bad days.
So you have
covering
technical difficulties, that's one
Right.
kind of bad, but also story content can also be very depressing as well.
Absolutely.
Right.
And you just get through it.
You've covered some stories that were not very pleasant. I can think of one in the South, in South Carolina, the Susan Smith story. That was the woman who drowned her 2 children and lied about it, and was quite a national controversy at the time. You covered that story, and it's depressing, it's sad, it involves a level of cruelty with a mother to her children that's hard to imagine. How do you have the fortitude and the strength to pursue stories like that and then not have it really affect you negatively emotionally?
Right. There's desensitivity that takes place as a journalist, and you kind of put your mind that you are covering a story, you're there to cover a story, and you have to take your emotions out of it so that you can cover the story effectively. In that situation, I did not have kids at the time, but it broke my heart. And then after it was all over, just the exhaustion for how many days it took place and how many days that you were covering it. And then finally, I remember my last day when I finally got off the air and just being exhausted and extremely emotional about the situation, because you finally learned there was an arrest made. She was arrested when she had lied about it for so long. And it was heartbreaking to think, her 2 little boys were killed at her hands. She was convicted, and she's now serving a sentence. But I remember too in San Diego covering a story of a police officer that was shot and killed, and going to the trial, and just hearing about his poor family and how that felt, and becoming emotional after that, because at that time I did have my own family, and it was just so heartbreaking to hear that this family had lost their loved one at the hands of a killer. And you just, you get through it, you cover the situation, and you move on to the next day. And the beauty of this business is, you cover the story, and for the most part, maybe the story is over and you don't have to follow it. But then in the case of a trial, you are covering it on a daily basis, and sometimes that can really get to you.
How do you prepare students for this lifestyle of being a correspondent, reporter, or even an anchor person? What are the most important things that they need to be thinking about as they prepare for their careers?
Well, first of all, they have to be passionate about it. I say you have to be a news junkie. I ask so many students, do you watch the news? Do you listen to the news? Are you getting news from your smartphone? Or, what's going on? And some people don't listen to any news, and it surprises me. Then why do you want to be a journalist? You have to be curious about what's going on in your community, first of all, and you have to be passionate about it. And you have to work hard to get there. You have to network too, because everybody knows somebody in this business. And you have to treat people right at that time, because if somebody hears that you didn't treat them right, then somebody knows somebody, and don't hire that person. So I just tell them they have to be willing to move too, because again, you can't just move up within one news organization. You have to move around to different cities, bigger cities, in order to move up in the business. And you have to be willing to work with all sorts of people, all sorts of different personalities. And you have to be you have to be driven in order to get the interview, persistent, and maybe you're not going to get the first interview. You don't give up. I mean, so many students, sometimes they email me with work. They're working on a story. Oh, that person doesn't want to talk to me. Well, then find somebody else. You have to figure it out. Find somebody else who you can interview about this particular story. And I think so many students, especially these days, are not even wanting to communicate in person, which makes it difficult. They don't even want to pick up the phone and call people. And I tell them, you have to be able to do that.
We're starting to run low on time, so this is the lightning round. Quick questions, quick answers. Okay. What has changed about the news business in the time that you've been involved in it?
Social media.
Okay.
You're having to use social media, and you're having to air your stories on a different platform.
Okay, with social media, we're looking at YouTube stars and Facebook stars and so forth. Are those people reporters or are they entertainers?
They're entertainers for sure. They don't follow the journalist's professional ethics, the code of ethics that journalists do. So I would say entertainers for sure.
Okay, so if we're talking about true journalists are all about integrity, about facts, getting the story right. Are we seeing enough of that or not enough of that these days?
Well, the news organizations I follow, you're still seeing that. I mean, we strive to be credible, we strive to be truthful, we strive to get our facts correctly. And, the people, but a lot of people can claim they're journalists, like a lot of bloggers out there, they're not journalists. I think the audience just needs to be informed. They need to be educated on what's journalism and what's not.
What is the line between activists and true journalists?
Well, you cannot go out there and be at a rally, a protest, a demonstration, and be able to be unbiased when you're covering a story. So.
All right, and so...
Don't cross that line.
If we're looking at today's journalists, are they caught up in what's called infotainment, or are they still focusing on news, in your opinion?
What they should be focusing on news, but you hear a lot of times when I ask people, why are you taking journalism classes? Oh, because I want to go do entertainment. And it's hard with all the platforms that we have these days. I mean, there is a fine line, though, as you said. There's journalism and then there's entertainment, and you have to know which side you want to be on. And sometimes there are journalists who move to entertainment, and then you really can't go back.
All right, 15 seconds left.
Okay.
If there's one thing you could change about television news, what would it be?
Oh, tough question. What would I change about television news? Can I use the audience? Let's see. I would want the audience to just be educated on what's news and what's not.
Great answer. And on that note, we do have to close the program out. But thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us on this edition of Talking Points. Be sure to join us again soon for another episode. Until then, I'm Dave Kelly. Have a nice day.